TV UK talk show, London Dialogue and Discourse, every Tuesday night, 7 p.m. UK time.
You are watching UK Talk Show with Tahir Gora at TAC TV. Today we are talking about Gilgit Baltistan. Our focus shall be on future of Gilgit Baltistan, particularly in the face of China's aggression and expansionist mindset. I'm honored to join with Professor Burzine Waghmar, South Asia Institute London member, and he has a great expertise in that region. Welcome, Professor Burzine Waghmar.
Thank you, Mr. Gora, and thank you to TAC TV.
Thank you, sir. And how do you see the situation and the future of Gilgit Baltistan in the face of China's aggression and expansionist mindset, particularly as we are witnessing those things very recently as well?
Could I commence by discussing the CPEC, since you asked me to frame it within that context? This China-Pakistan Economic Corridor commences with the northern areas, erstwhile northern areas, now known since 2007 as Gilgit Baltistan, which is a de facto but not de jure province of Pakistan and has been left in limbo since 1947 partition, and of course the Karachi Agreement of 1949 between India and Pakistan itself. But I'll move on to that subsequently. It's just that the CPEC corridor, as you asked, starts in Gilgit Baltistan and ends on the shores of the Makran littoral in Balochistan. And both ends of Pakistan are in slow burn mode. Both ends are extremely impoverished, underpopulated, and will not necessarily benefit from the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, despite what has been proposed in either the first phase, which has just come to fruition, and even now the so-called second phase, despite the niggles that the Imran Khan administration is having with Beijing. Nothing discernible which actually would make an impact at grassroots level will occur. And forget Balochistan for now, because we're talking about Gilgit Baltistan. In the northern areas' case, the only development that has really happened, and I'm sorry to state so grimly, is what the Aga Khan development program has sustained in this impoverished region. And there have been some state attempts by the federal government in Islamabad, I do grant that, but they have not necessarily had a salient impact on the lives of the populace, who remain, of course, impoverished, despite other indicators such as literacy being higher than other parts of Pakistan. So, and this China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, one must query aloud exactly what is going to be undertaken in a fragile alpine ecosystem as the northern areas, Gilgit Baltistan. I mean, any talk of a so-called Khunjerab railway, which comes to mind and which has been proposed, is pie-in-the-sky thinking. Then again, there is the Karakoram Highway, which was constructed between 1966 and 1978 and open to traffic from 82, officially speaking, Sino-Pak traffic, and to tourists and travelers from 1986, which remains a white elephant at best and underutilized, except, of course, for by the Pakistan administration for transporting missiles from North Korea and that sort of thing, and for military purposes. There has been some trade, but it has not really had an impact, and there have been no accruals or trickle-down effects of the said highway to the region in its near environs at large.
So I'm very grateful that you have shed light on CPEC. And this is, of course, a worrisome issue for the region as well as its viability. I would come back to my concern and question again. So in the light of this reality, what do you see the future of Gilgit Baltistan in the face of China's aggression?
Pakistan has practically written it off to the People's Republic of China, and I wish there was a gentler way of breaking it. For one thing, I mean, from 1947 to 2009, when President Zardari passed the so-called Gilgit Baltistan Self-Ordinance Governance, through which a unicameral assembly was set up, finally, only in 2009, and from which point we have a so-called Gilgit Baltistan Council, but again, whose chairman remains the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Well, I ask you, if the Prime Minister of Pakistan is the chair of the said council, then it begs the question as to where is Gilgit Baltistan still in, and why is it in administrative limbo? Because it is not mentioned explicitly as the fifth or any province of Pakistan. It was never mentioned in the 1956, 62 or the 73 constitutions, and there has been no amendment to the effect, even in the last one, which is still operational, the 73 document. It was never intended by Jinnah to be part of the new Union of Pakistan, the Dominion of Pakistan, which came into effect. When the Gilgit Agency, after much local upheaval, came into Karachi, which was then the capital's administration, after 17th November 1947, Pakistan responded with alacrity, if not surprise, because it did not even occur to them in their equation. Since Jinnah was completely besotted with the valley, the Vale of Kashmir, and was seeking to influence Sheikh Abdullah for a so-called plebiscite which would have occurred, and to have the Vale incorporated into the new Pakistan Dominion. Gilgit Baltistan did not even merit as an afterthought in the minds of Pakistani planners. It simply fell into their laps, and they've dealt with it just like that. And like I said, there has been nothing been done, at least since 1970, when the Gilgit Agency was finally dismantled, which ran from 1889. And only in 1982 did Zia-ul Haq queried aloud as to what should be done. But then he went on very shrewdly to declare that the Gilgit Baltistan is, the northern areas, that is to say, is integral to the Pakistani Federation and has no bearing on the first Indo-Pakistani war's consequences and the so-called unfinished business of partition. Well, all very well. But then why between 1982 and 2009 nothing was done to respond to the grievances of its populace, who always sought some representation either at the provincial or the federal level in Islamabad, which of course, and the latter which they still lack.
It is being said that the people in Gilgit Baltistan like to adhere with Pakistan. But as we see the widespread protests in Gilgit Baltistan against Pakistan's aggression and Pakistan's wrong policies, what is your view in terms of people's aspiration in Gilgit Baltistan?
Right. For the historical record, it must be said in November 47, at the time of these upheavals, there was a certain section of the populace who were keen to join the new Dominion of Pakistan, but by no means all. A certain section of the populace, led by Shah Rais Khan, as you know from his Tariq-e-Gilgit, which is available in Urdu to read. But then there were others, and this is interesting, Mr. Gora, Gilgit Scouts, who had been formed since 1913, they were extremely upset that the British were leaving, and moreover that the British handed over the Gilgit Agency, which was on a 60-year lease from 1935, back to Sir Hari Singh, the Maharaja, because they did not want to welcome back Dogra rule under which they had chafed for so long. It must be stated on record that the Gilgit Scouts were more than happy with the British administration and were very disappointed with London that it was departing. That must be stated. Now, putting aside the vested interests who wanted to join with the new federation, and as I pointed out earlier, Pakistan had no intention of Gilgit or Baltistan even coming into its domain because it never asked for it, it never even thought of it. But it just happened due to a variety of circumstances. But the point is, if we fast forward to the present, what exactly has happened in Gilgit Baltistan? Well, it's disquieting to say the least, because Pakistan much as it likes to vaunt itself as the vanguard of Islamic sensibilities and as a self-styled Muslim polity, and castigates Israel on the occupied territories of Palestine and for changing the demographics there, Islamabad has precisely undertaken that successively down the decades in Gilgit Baltistan by consciously, deliberately having Pashtuns and Punjabi population move, particularly Pashtuns from Chitral and Mastuj and Indus Kohistan, move into Gilgit to alter the demographics. Now, the question then is this. Why would it do so? Because we're not talking about, say, a Hindu population or a Sikh population, which, of course, left by the time of partition. It is a homogeneous Muslim population, predominantly Shia, both 12 Ithna Asharis and also Ismailis, and a Sunni minority. And that brings us to the point of what I'm getting at. Zia's mischief making when he wanted to change the demographics and contain Shia aspirations and quell Shia grievances against the administration at large, which were not sectarian by any mean, which were to do with, shall we say, daily bread and butter, rosy roti issues. But still, Zia being Zia, wanted to implement the politics of exclusivism, which he had obviously done across the rest of Pakistan, and poison the mindsets of people across other provinces too. And this is precisely what happened after Ramadan 1988, when the first official awful purging of Shias took place. Under a certain Brigadier Parvez Musharraf, if you must know, who Zia sent out to Gilgit to quell local Shias. And this was just done barely at the end of Ramadan in the week of Eid. Widespread looting, killing, and even some rapes have been reported of Muslims by fellow Muslims. And this was on Ziaul Haq's watch, prior to his death, of course, in that very year, in August 88. And that, since then, the waters have been poisoned in particularly the region of Gilgit, which is a Ithna Ashari 12 Shia region. And of course, Pashtuns have regularly been brought in, plus the administration in Islamabad has played off with non-ruling local elites to hold sway over locals with these co-opting colonial diversionary tactics of local biradaris and local rulers as frontmen who are anything but representatives of the local population, which is disgruntled to say the least. But again, I must harp on 1988 as a historian, because since then we see the unraveling of the sentiments in the region. This is not to say that there was love lost earlier, but this was deliberately done by Islamabad, and or should I say the garrison in Pindi, to poison the waters, and a population which was at best ambivalent about Pakistan, I repeat, at best ambivalent, was deliberately made to despise Pakistan and Pakistani officialdom. Now, exactly what was achieved by that? Well, I leave it to the key players to find out, because obviously it's not worked in their benefit.
So in the face of all those demographic changes done by Pakistani establishment, do you see resentment from the mainland Gilgit Baltistan, Shia, and the native people against Pakistan's those sort of attempts?
Yes, subsequent rulers and subsequent administrations, regardless of partisan politics, whether it's of this party, PPP administration or a non-PPP, regardless, it's just that people feel alienated and feel like Bahar ke log, I mean, in conversations, oh, I'm going to Karachi, is not I'm going to Karachi for a job, as any chap from Skardu would say, but I'm going to Pakistan. I mean, that tells you the mental disposition of someone, the sense of alienation. Now, partly, of course, it must be said about border people everywhere in life who do feel a bit distant or detached from the center and the hurly-burly of politics. But what has been done by the center or by the rest of Pakistanis to, make them feel inclusive, as it were, that again is to be pointed out, which is clearly not the case. And again, as I pointed out, a chap from Skardu would say, I'm going for Kaam ke liye to Pakistan, means Bahar Jana, so to speak. Well, in the same coin, Pakistanis, someone sitting in Lahore or Quetta would say, oh, these are Pahadi log. I mean, what do you mean by Pahadi log? Of course, their mountains are there and some of the highest ranges in the world. But that is a lazy, inaccurate assumption of everybody who is so-called Pahadi log. And that's all they seem to know, or Kabile ke log, just tribal people, as it were.
So there's a lot of talk in Pakistan these days about making Gilgit Baltistan, previously known as Northern Area, as the fifth province. And when the Pakistani establishment being asked that why they are not declaring Gilgit Baltistan as fifth province, then they respond, we don't want to give India sort of an excuse to have their changes in Riyasat Jammu and Kashmir, what India has already done. So what do you think the narrative behind the scene you see within the Pakistani establishment not declaring Gilgit Baltistan as the fifth province?
As I just pointed out a few minutes ago, Mr. Gora, to the Zia factor, when Zia in April 82 made a public declarative that the northern areas are integral to Pakistan and they have no bearing on the long-standing Jammu-Kashmir issue. So that happened when he declared in 82. 9 secretaries from the Pakistan Civil Service in 1985 were asked to draw up a working commission report. And various points were mooted, either amalgamation with Punjab, or amalgamation with Azad Kashmir, make it an independent province, none of which came to pass. Until, of course, 2009, with this mealy-mouthed attempt to have a unicameral assembly and some representation. And even the fact that 2 years earlier in 2007, the name of the region, the topography was actually made to reflect the situation on ground by calling it Gilgit Baltistan. From 1970 to 2007, it was just known vaguely as northern areas, Shumali Ilaka, which of course means anything and everything, with the sense of, oh, they're just, like I said, Pahadi people, as it were. But to come back to what you asked, now, what exactly is this ambivalence and blow hot, blow cold attitude on the part of the Pakistani establishment? Well, they play their cards very close to their chest and are not going to declare them. But even therein is a contradiction, since they can't quite make up their minds of what they want. If Zia said in 1982 that it's an integral component of the Federation of Pakistan, then, well, why was it not made a fifth province? Why is it in limbo? Why is it not mentioned in the constitutions? Why no amendment has been done? So it's a question of disingenuity. You can say you want to use it as a card in your politicking and dealings with India for whatever endgame there may be with Jammu and Kashmir. But again, I reiterate this, Mr. Gora, because this is very important. If you have said that Jammu and Kashmir is disputed and therefore no question can be resolved on it until we reach some status down the road, but then if Zia has said this about the northern areas in 82, why doesn't he put his money where his mouth is and actually make it a province? Because then how would it question? Well, they would say, and this was the argument made in the garrison in Pindi, that then India would say, you have undertaken a fait accompli. But then again, and there are wheels within wheels, it is already a fait accompli because Gilgit Baltistan is a de facto, if not a de jure province of Pakistan, because Islamabad very much calls the shots, as it were.
So, in your expertise, what do you think is the natural outcome for Gilgit Baltistan people to have their accession with Pakistan, with India? What would be their natural accession mode?
It is difficult for me sitting in London to tell what the local population feels, except that there is widespread disgruntlement across the board with Islamabad, not just with the question of unrepresentative politics, which of course are on ground, but then this conscious politics of exclusivism and Pakistani Punjabi Pashtun chauvinism, which has had a pernicious effect on the lives of these otherwise peaceful peoples. I mean, as I said, by deliberately altering the demographics and sending in Pashtuns, outsiders, if you will, who are not indigenous to the region, to go and settle in there. Exactly what Pakistan intends to achieve in the long run by this so-called game of strategic depth, as so many in Islamabad love to tout about, it escapes me utterly. I mean, every government does something to bring in people on board. Here you are deliberately paying a policy of alienating people. So at this point, of course, and that brings me to where I started with mentioning when I did that both ends of Pakistan are in slow burn mode, Balochistan and Gilgit Baltistan. And at both ends, the establishment and officialdom has gone out of its way, out on a limb to alienate fellow Muslims. I would have imagined, given how the socio-economic indicators in Jammu and Kashmir, the territory of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh is, not to mention other yardsticks that are available through statistics, and wherein you see the populace consistently achieves higher in literacy, per capita income, food consumption, calorie intake, and the rest compared to the rest of India, that Gilgit Baltistanis must look on with regret as to what has been their fate in the last 7 decades.
So as we all know that CPEC is going through from Gilgit Baltistan to Balochistan. And if any major thing happens in Gilgit Baltistan, what would be the future of CPEC?
Well, it's already happening as we speak. Take Chilas as a town, which is, to put it bluntly, if not coarsely, is a regular adda for militants crossing from AFPAC border. It's become like a hostel for them, where all of them just keep coming into Chilas. And it's a safe haven for these militants. They always seem to make a beeline for Chilas, which is a tourist spot and a sleepy little town, and where there have been considerable counterterrorism operations in the last few years. And of course, then that has had pernicious effects in sectarianism by affecting local Chilasi Shias. And of course, the fights with Sunni and so on and so forth. So it is already happening as we speak. And to think it is grim to even prognosticate as to what would happen with a Taliban administration in the offing in Kabul. I mean, those in Islamabad may think they have found an ally on their front. Well, that may be wishful thinking if the antics of the Pakistani TTP is anything to go by, not to mention the so-called Punjabi Taliban.
So, do you fear that China would take over some parts of Gilgit Baltistan or even the whole part and could claim territorial sort of a possession there when China sees Pakistan's total failure in terms of controlling Gilgit Baltistan?
I'm glad you pointed that out, Mr. Gora, because in a way, Pakistan has on a platter given some 2,500 square kilometers of what was the erstwhile kingdom of Jammu and Kashmir to Peking through the Sino-Pak boundary agreement of 2nd March 1963, which Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was very instrumental in getting going, since he wanted to obviously snub at India after Nehru's humiliation of the 62 war. It was a very politic move on the part of Bhutto, it must be stated. Politic in the sense he took advantage of a current situation to cozy up with the Chinese and to seek a modus vivendi with them and this border agreement. Because remember, the PRC, Mao's China back then, had problems with everyone. Sikkim, Bhutan, Nepal, India, and Pakistan and Afghanistan, insofar as the borders which were not particularly demarcated at the end of the imperial era after the communists took power in October 49. So it was a very brilliant tactical move on the part of Bhutto as foreign minister in 63. But by doing so, at that stage, it must again be asked exactly what was Pakistan's sincerity on the entire Kashmir question if you think you can just lop off a part of a so-called disputed territory, which Pakistan in the first place was banging on about since 1947 when the issue went to the General Assembly and Security Council, which of course Nehru took up. And then despite claiming that the entire question of the valley is in limbo and no plebiscite has been held, so on and so forth, it finds it entirely convenient to give parts of the Trans-Karakoram Tract, Shigar and the Tagdumba Shparir and Pamirs and the Oprang salt mine areas to Beijing for grazing to their local Sarikoli population, which just falls on the other side in Xinjiang. I mean, Pakistan's sincerity on the entire question of solving Jammu and Kashmir is dubious at best, questionable at worst, given what happened in March 1963. So, if that Beijing would look upon this region as a vassalage in times to come is not exactly blue sky thinking. It could come to pass. And do remember, Mr. Gora, that parts of Hunza Haldekesh, and at least the Mirs of Hunza from the 18th and 19th century onwards, were surrogates and who paid tribute annually to the Amirs in Kashgar, which falls on the other side. So there have been some links in the past. Historic ethno-linguistic links were there, particularly in the part of Hunza, Skardu, Ganche districts with the Kashgar prefecture. But it would come to pass, if it were, that Pakistan would be more than happy to let this part of what is its territory, which it has never really acknowledged, to become a vassal or an appendage of Xinjiang and the Khotan prefecture.
So as India claims that Gilgit Baltistan is part and parcel of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, so what do you think India would do in future in terms of reclaiming its territories?
Well, I'm a historian. I can tell you what has happened, not what would happen. But the question is, what exactly would be New Delhi's thinking? Current New Delhi thinking, from what I gather, is that the entire question is one of dispute. Pakistan has no claims over it. And as I've repeatedly pointed out in this program, Pakistan does not even want to claim it, but just makes a bahana of claiming it, as it were. So if the PRC were to step in, which could occur and which cannot be dismissed, the entire question would come to the point where China, which already has a dog in the fight, a dog in this Kashmiri fight, would mean that India will have no further discussion, and it will not, as we know from the rescinding of Article 370 last year, that the Jammu-Kashmir issue is settled once and for all. That is to say, the Union territories of Ladakh and Jammu and Kashmir are part of the Indian Union. If it were to come that the PRC takes over Gilgit Baltistan, and which India would continue looking on as occupied by the Beijing administration. But the question is, Pakistan would lose absolute credibility then, because it has, and that should be plainly manifest to Kashmiris in the diaspora, in Azad Kashmir, and also in the valley in Jammu and Kashmir, that Pakistan has never been an honorable stakeholder in this entire question since 1947, which has simply been driven by the politics of partition, memory, and the humiliation of 1971, which it wants to avenge by lopping off a part of India. And I point that out, noting that December 2021 is when Bangladesh turns 50. And of course, when it does, Mr. Gora, as it will, it brings to mind what Indira Gandhi said, where The Economist asked her in January 1972 as to what of the two-nation theory now, to which she responded, well, it lies in the Bay of Bengal.
So, in your conclusive remarks in our today's conversation, what would you like to add more, what you really think we are missing in our conversation?
I think we've covered everything thanks to your comprehensive parameters. But moving forward, the dispensation in Kabul to come is disquieting, to say the least. And Pakistan will exploit that Taliban option to not just muddy the waters in the northern areas and Azad Kashmir, not to mention threaten India which is why precisely the administration decided to bifurcate the princely realm into two union territories. It was a politic move on India's part, and it's high time people realize that the Kabul question was precisely why Modi jump-started and had to undertake what he did. The question is, I fear for the local population, which will be under the twin yokes of Pashtun Sunni obscurantist chauvinism and fundamentalism. That is to say, the 12 Shia population in Chitral, Gilgit, Baltistan, Astor, not to mention the Ismailis in Hunza and Haldekesh, who are, of course, deemed heretics and not even considered Muslims proper by the kind of people who hold the mindsets in Kabul and in Lahore. And you can imagine the ethnic unrest that would occur. And if China steps into the fray, it's going to look at a complete mess which is going to fall in its lap. And that if the Chinese think that everyone settles down by doing business and prosperity brings peace and plenitude and quietude, then it's sorely mistaken. Because the Chinese don't understand the factors on ground here in the Pakistani dimension.
Thank you very much, Professor Burzine Waghmar, for your very valuable comments and your insight. Thank you for watching my conversation with Professor Burzine Waghmar on past, present and future of Gilgit Baltistan.
Tech TV UK Talk Show, London Dialogue and Discourse, every Tuesday night 7 p.m. UK time. Subscribe Tag TV YouTube channel and press the notification button.